All right, so you've got a buyer under contract. We all know how difficult that can be. We know how hard it is to find the perfect house for a buyer. But I'll tell you, one of the most disappointing things as an agent is doing all of that work and then all of it come crashing down all because of an inspector, or an inspection report rather. So we can hedge these inspection reports in the way that we present them. Most agents just look at that as a step out of the picture, let the inspector and the client do their thing. The problem is there's not an inspector in this town that sells houses. They all inspect. You've got to have on that salesman hat when you're presenting that inspection report. Otherwise, you're gonna lose them. You're gonna scare them, especially first-time home buyers. So the way we do that, it all starts in the setup of that inspection when you're scheduling it, okay? We never ever want to make it an obvious strong stance, but we also don't ever want to make it an obvious invitation that the buyer is to meet the inspector at the property. A lot of agents do this, and I think it is it's a misstep in going the wrong direction. If you put that buyer at the end of an inspection report with an inspector that's not a salesman, they are going to just get slapped in the face and think their house is falling apart. So how do we do this? First of all, I highly recommend that you get Doug Davis into as many inspection situations with your clients as you possibly can. Doug and I have worked together now for coming up 15, 16 years. We have developed a great system. The language that he uses, the verbiage that he uses, is all designed to soften things. He understands what we're trying to accomplish, and he writes his reports accurately, but he does it in a way that he's not trying to scare people. Now, there are certain things that he has to write when he observes them, and when he does that, it's our job as the agents to make sure that we present it in the proper way to our clients, to not scare them. Now, what I'm not saying is we want to keep a buyer in a house that's falling apart. But what I am saying is a buyer is going to think every house is falling apart if the inspection isn't presented correctly. So here's how we're going to do it. Okay, so when it comes time to scheduling the inspection, it's very simple. Your buyer is always going to feed off of you, your confidence, and the way that you present things. So when I make that phone call, it's very easy. It's, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, we've got 10 days to get our inspection done. I need to go ahead and get that set up and scheduled for you. A guy, and I typically, it's okay, you can ask, do you know an inspector, if you feel like that makes the situation and conversation better. You have an inspector in mind. I've never had a buyer that actually has an inspector in mind, but even if they do, you can come over the top of that with, hey, I can absolutely check their schedule. I also highly recommend Doug Davis. He's the only guy in town who can do both a structural inspection and a termite inspection. Any of the other inspection companies, we're going to have to call out a SWAT or another pest control company. So that's a huge bonus. But you're also working with a guy who has a degree specifically for that. And so he's very capable and great at doing both of those inspections. Anyway, when you present it in that way to the client, 9 times out of 10, they are going to tell you, yeah, please go ahead and see if Doug can fit us in. The other thing that may come up in that conversation is them attending the inspection. In other markets, and even in this market, in all honesty, it's not uncommon for that agent to want to step out of the process and let them schedule an inspection with the inspector, and then them go to the inspection. And now you've got a situation where you have an inspector that's wearing his inspector hat presenting an inspection to your buyer. That inspector's not a salesman. That inspector doesn't have finesse. That inspector does not know the language and the things that you've talked to that buyer about, so they don't know the soft places to present it. It's not that we're trying to hide anything from our buyers. We're just wanting to protect them in a way that we can present the information in a way that they can best understand it and process it. And the reality is, when they're there at that appointment, after Doug just spent 2 hours doing the inspection, Doug doesn't have the time for finesse, and they are going to be so overwhelmed with these lists of what we know is nitpicky things, but to them, it's going to make them feel like their house is falling apart. So control that environment, control the situation, so now you can present it to them in a way that they're going to best understand it and be able to process it. When we're setting the expectation with the buyer, in regards to their them being at the appointment and kind of how they fit into that process, a way that you can easily roll through that. And again, this is keeping in mind that most buyers don't even know that there is an invite by most inspectors to come to at the end of those inspections. But a great way that you can do that is when you call them and let them know, hey, I've got your inspection scheduled for Wednesday morning. Doug's going to send that report over either that evening or the next morning. How about I give you a call as soon as we get it, and we'll set a time to come and meet in the office. When you roll it out in that way, it never comes up. The opportunity to go meet at the inspection doesn't come up because you've already told them that you are going to meet after you receive the inspection to review it. And again, most don't know that that invitation is open to be able to go and meet the inspector. But the other great thing about Doug Davis is if we ever do need him to get on the phone with us, or if we ever do need him to come back out and visit the property with our client, he'll absolutely do it. But now we're in control of the situation. We can set the stage, we can set the expectations with Doug, we can set the expectations with the client, and now it's not completely out of your control and a ticking time bomb ready to blow up. Okay, so now we have scheduled the inspection. The inspector went by himself, and now what? He sends you an inspection report to your email. Doug typically will do that the day of the inspection, that evening. So when I'm preparing my buyer, doesn't matter what's happening. I always tell them if the inspection's on a Thursday, look to hear from me by noon on Friday with your report and some recommendations. So here's how I come up with those recommendations and the process I take in presenting that inspection report. So first of all, inspection reports are going to vary by thickness, right? This one that I have in front of me is one that we actually did. It's from 414, and it is rather thick. It's a very scary one, and it's a really good example of a deal that would have absolutely blown up had I not been the intermediary in presenting this information to the buyer. There are some things in this report specifically with some of the 5 major components that we look at, which those 5 components are going to be your roof, your foundation, your electrical, your plumbing, and your HVAC. Okay, so when I am preparing a buyer for these inspections, I'm already using those 5 major components and instilling that in their head that those are the 5 things that we're mostly focused on. Obviously, there's a lot more to a house than just those 5 things, but if I have my buyer understanding that we're focused on those 5 major components and maybe only one item is mentioned on one of those 5, I'm going to have a much smoother process, as opposed to someone who is not prepared and has not seen an inspection report before. Getting a report with every item marked as deficient, they're already working against you because they think their house is falling apart. But if you've trained them to only look at those 5 specific areas, then they aren't going to feel that way because they are already expecting it. Another way that I like to prepare and plan for my buyer receiving a report is send them some old reports. Send them a report from the previous week. Start saving some of your worst reports and send those to them. So now they're familiar with knowing, hey, every house is going to have deficiencies, and it's just part of the process. When I get that inspection report, I repeat, I do not forward that immediately to my client. I'm not doing anything as an intermediary if I'm just forwarding it to the client. I've got to do something to buffer the blow that they're about to feel when they read that report. The way that I personally do that, I print out the report. I'm old school. I like it in paper. I print out the report just like this, and then I go through it page by page, and I highlight any items that I think need to be addressed. When I'm doing this initially, I'm not doing this in any kind of an order. I'm not doing this in any type of a list of most important to least important. I'm simply highlighting the things that stand out to me in that report. Over time, as you start to see more and more of these reports, it's going to become way easier for you to do this. In the beginning, let's sit down and let's do that together. We can pull out what these major components are. Once I've gone through every page of the inspection report, now it's my job to look at what some of those major components are. I start to list those in order of importance and significance and value. And then I start to come up with how I want to present and recommend we approach the repair amendment. In this particular report, it is very extensive. There's a lot of things. There were items noted on all 5 of the major components, but I would say in a lot of cases a deal like this would have blown up right from the beginning. But because my buyer was properly educated and knew what to expect, this didn't scare them at all. So I simply go through this report and I build an email that I send to them along with the report. So before they ever click and open the report, they already see my recommendations and they already know what to expect. So now all of the highlights and pictures and all the red ink, it's not scary to them anymore. When I send the email with the inspection report along with all of my notes and summary, most of the time, depending on the client, you've got to know how to read this, and this is something that just comes with time. But I know the clients that I can go ahead and type an amendment for. And those clients, they get an amendment along with the inspection report and my notes, and I let them know in that email that I'm also dropping it in DigiSign and it's ready for their signatures. When you have the ability to do that, you know you've got complete and total client control. You know that your client trusts you. That is something that you have to earn, and that's something that's not easy. So don't get discouraged if on your first few clients it seems like they're almost inquisitive and don't trust you. That's just normal. You gotta be able to implement the things throughout that buying process that gains that trust to make sure that they know that they've got a professional in the seat, that they're trusting to push this amendment and these repairs for them. And don't forget, you are a real estate salesperson. You're not expected to know and understand everything in an inspection report. If you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to, it's perfectly okay to say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure, but let me call the inspector or let me go by the property and find out for you. But the last thing you want to do is leave those types of concerns unaddressed, because that is what's going to fester and grow and come back to blow up on you later. So we've got the inspection report, we've got an amendment, our buyer's good. Now what? We take that inspection report or the applicable pages that we mentioned in our amendment, and we send that over to the other agent. I never just leave that in an email. A lot of agents forget this is a relationship-based business, and without a relationship, you don't have anybody pulling for you. So what I like to do is I put it in the email, I detail it out. I don't skip any steps. I pretend as if I'm not going to talk to them and all the information's in that email, because the reality is we're busy. And if I call and I pick him up and get this other agent and they're having a really busy day, I don't want them to forget any of the little nuggets that I'm starting to plant that's going to help them be able to sell this amendment to their seller. So when I detail out that and I send the email, I pick up the phone and I go through it and I explain. Most of the time in any amendment, you're going to have two types of requests. You're going to have fluff that really doesn't matter and really isn't concerning to your client, and you're going to have those important things. It's those important things that you need to note on that phone call with that other agent so they can focus on them. If they don't know what's important to you, then how are they going to present it in a way to keep that seller in being mindful of these things are what's most important, right? So we mention those things, we have that conversation, and we set the stage. We want to give as many tools as we can to that selling agent, so he has the best opportunity to be able to get his client to agree. So another way that we can address repairs is with credits. This is something that you've got to be very mindful of, is it's not right for every situation, it's not right for every client, and it's not right for every repair. But keeping those things in mind, when you do negotiate a credit, you can get that to your buyer in two different ways. You can get that through closing cost credit at closing, or you can get that in a reduction in the sales price. Again, you've got to look at your specific situation. You've got to look at how much closing cost you already have, what kind of loan do you have, what's the max allowable on those closing costs, all of those things. But additionally, you've got to look at the repair through the eyes of that buyer. Do they have funds to handle this after closing if it does turn into something major? All through this process, that buyer is what's most important to us, and protecting them and making sure that we put them in a good situation is what's most important. So when we don't want to put somebody who's spending their last little bit of money on down payment into a house in the middle of winter when we know the air conditioner is not going to work come summertime. You don't want to set the stage for your client that way, so make sure that we're mindful of their situation and the repairs, and that we gel those two things together for what's best for them. When we're writing our amendment, something that is very, very frustrating, and you'll learn this when you're on the selling side and you get a very disorganized amendment. And I will tell you, the majority of amendments and inspection reports, when they're brought to you as a listing agent, are going to feel very disorganized. For that reason, make sure that you're not ever considered that way, and make sure that agents look at you as somebody that when you do bring them a challenging situation or a challenge report, at least you're putting it in the most presentable and easiest way to show as possible. The way I like to do that is I correlate my inspection report with in my amendment. So Roman numeral 1, paragraph A, and then I state very clearly and specifically what my request is. Let me give you an example. Per attached inspection report, Roman numeral 2, section B, all plugs to function properly as noted. Master bathroom, front porch, guest bath. Additionally, seller to install GFCI outlets and receptacles in basement bathroom. Continue. The point is I don't just reference the section of the report, and I don't just reference a general repair. I combine the two, and I make it very, very easy for that seller or for that seller's agent to be able to look in this inspection report, in this section, and they're going to see everything that I need. But I don't just leave it to chance that they read everything in the inspection. I restate it in my actual amendment. If you were to do that and just reference a section and they happen to not miss anything, you as the buyer's agent would be at fault, because what's in the amendment is the only thing that's being promised, and generalities can't be promised. Inspection reports should never be the cause of a deal blowing up. If we are doing our jobs the right way during our buying process, and we're preparing our clients the right way, that should never be the case. Now, what I'm not saying is that if we see major components that we just try to sell around that. No, we want good situations for our buyers, but there is not a property that exists that would have a completely perfect inspection report. You can go get $1 million brand new construction, or you can get a $40,000 investment property. They're both going to have some of the exact same inspection items. So make sure that you're setting the stage with your client and you're setting proper expectations, and we won't see any of these deals fall through. If we make sure that we prepare our clients the right way and we set the proper expectations, we will not see our contracts fall through on inspection report issues.